Hello, I'd like to do a little discussion, commentary on the 613 commandments God gave Moses. Let me say the 613 figure was codified by rabbi called Rambam, nicknamed Rambam, Moses ben Maimon, otherwise known as Maimonides. There's a big hospital named after him. You know, a lot of charitable work was done in his name. But he codified the commandments of Exodus, Deuteronomy, Leviticus, Numbers, Genesis, and put them all down and listed them. And he came up with 613. Uh, I'd like to go over it. By the way, also, the list of the Torah of Moses is actually including the 10 Commandments given at Exodus 20. All 10 Commandments are listed in the Torah of Moses. Uh, just wanted to emphasize that. For example, commandment number 1 is to believe in God. Of the 613, that how it relates to the 10. Commandment number 2 also is to believe in God and that He's eternal. Uh, Commandment number 3 of the Torah is not to blaspheme God's name. Commandment number 4 is not to hallow God's name. Commandment number 7 is pertaining to the first commandment in the tablets, the 10 tablets, to love God. Uh, For example, commandment number 28 of the Torah is not to commit lashon hara, which is to bear false witness. Um, Honor your father and mother. That's commandment number 59. Um, Adultery, commandment number 102 of the 613. Commandment number 89 is to honor the Sabbath. I'm sorry, 108 discusses traveling on the Sabbath. 111 discusses sanctifying the Sabbath. 109, excuse me, discusses sanctifying the Sabbath. 111 discusses resting on the Sabbath. Yeah, so they pertain to commandment number 4 of the 10 commandments. Uh, there's don't curse, which is commandment number 9. Bearing false testimony, commandment number 241 in the Torah, is also commandment number 9 on the 10 tablets, the 10 commandments. Commandment number 274 is commandment number 8, which is not to steal. Commandment number 278 in the Torah is commandment number 6 on the 10 tablets, which is not to slay the innocent, don't murder. It's also mentioned. Robbery, also violence, commandment 280. Don't covet, commandment 282. Uh, don't commit idolatry, commandment 312 in the Torah. Uh, what else? Those are basically the 10 commandments that are listed in the Torah of Moses. So all 10 commandments are in the Torah of Moses. So just in case people want to throw out the Torah of Moses, they're actually throwing out the 10 commandments also, which are included. And when I say throw out, I mean there's certain texts that I'm not getting into. That's not the topic of discussion that discusses the Torah of Moses is nailed to the cross. It's done away with. It's no longer applicable or relevant. And I'll discuss that in more details about the applicability of the Torah of Moses as as it pertains to, for example, the temple is not standing. So obviously, priesthood, sacrifices, things pertaining to the temple can't be implemented. But it doesn't mean that the commandments, are not applicable itself. Just those specific aspects of it. So, with that being said, let me start off with the presentation. I'm going to also put a link to the list of the 613 commandments so that anyone can review it for themselves. Let me do some sharing so that I can pull up the screen and we can all relate to the commandments that I am referencing. Okay. 1 second. Give me a second. Okay, there we go. All right, so this is a list. I'm going to send it, post it also in the video, in the description or as well, so that anyone can pull up the list as we're discussing it. So as you can see, the first commandment is to know that God exists, which is what I just said. Like not to be an atheist, because if you're an atheist and you don't believe in God, then these commandments are irrelevant to you anyway. Not to entertain the idea that there's any other God but the eternal, the second commandment, not to blaspheme God's name. By the way, let me go over the list. I'm sorry, I should have done that. The list is going to consist of different categories of commandments. Like, for example, the first category, you see it pertains to God. The second is pertaining to the Torah. The third is pertaining to signs and symbols. The fourth, prayer and blessings, love and brotherhood, the poor and the unfortunate, Gentiles, marriage, divorce, and family, forbidden sexual relations, times and seasons, dietary laws, business practices, employees, servants, and slaves, vows, oaths, and swearing, sabbatical and jubilee year. This is the seventh year Sabbath, not the seventh day Sabbath. Court, judicial procedures, injury and damages, property rights, criminal laws, punishment and restitution, including capital punishment, idolatry, idolaters and idolatrous practices, agriculture and animal husbandry, clothing, the firstborn, the Kohanim, which is the priests, and the Levites, the teruma, which is voluntary offerings, tithes and taxes, the temple, the sanctuary and sacred objects, sacrifices, offerings, ritual purity and impurity, lepers and leprosy, the king, Nazarites, and wars. So those are the category of the commandments that they break down into. Some call them moral law, ceremonial law, civil law, and so forth. But those are the specific categories if you wanted to break them down. All right, so let's start with, we just started actually with the first two commandments regarding not to blaspheme and not to believe in God and not to believe in any other God but the God, the eternal God, not to blaspheme. Commandment number 4, this is the list of the 613, by the way, which includes the 10, as I mentioned. Commandment number 4 in the Torah is to hallow God's name, which is one of the 10, not to profane God's name, to love God. I think that's what Yeshua said was the greatest commandment, to love God and to love your neighbor. Was the second was just like the first. So that's one of the 613, which Yeshua actually upheld, because in the 10 commandments, it doesn't say love God specifically. So when Yeshua said the greatest commandment is to love God, he was actually pointing to the Torah of Moses, where it says it's a command to love God, the seventh command, actually. Okay, not to put God's to the test. Remember Jesus' temptation. He quoted these actually, the Torah of Moses when he was refuting Hasatan, Satan, when he wanted to tempt him to, throw himself down on the ground. The 3 temptations: turn water into bread and worship God. He actually quoted the Torah of Moses in refuting Satan 3 times. So the second set is to the Torah, is pertaining to the Torah. So as we know, very popular, commandment 14, not to add to the commandments, or 15, not to subtract from the commandments of the Torah. Um, Also, it's encouraged that every person write, I think it was a poem uh, regarding the instructions, but also this says every person shall write a scroll of the Torah. Um, that's number 16. Signs and symbols to circumcise, that's Genesis 17, that's a command. Tzitzit is the tefillin. Remember when the woman hung onto the hem of Yeshua's garment? She was actually holding on to his zitzits, which is a reminder to keep the commandments. Excuse me. Tefillin and mezuzah, other signs and symbols. Mezuzah, of course, is what you put on the doorpost of your home when you enter it. It's a reminder of the Shema, that God is one, Deuteronomy 6:4, which is also a command. And the 10 Commandments is the zitzit. So God wants you to do certain things as signs. Also, the Sabbath is a sign too. I think Exodus 31, of our identity in God. The next category is prayer and blessings, to pray. Um, I find it interesting that a command, also the scriptures pertaining to the commands is given as well. So when you go through it with the list, you can cross references with the scriptures. Excuse me. Yeah, to say the Shema every morning and night. That's Deuteronomy 6:4. Hear, O Israel, the Lord our God, the Lord is one. Commandment 26 to 39 is pertaining to love and brotherhood. How we treat our brothers, not to bear grudges, forgiveness, things like that, to assist them. So basically, like I said, Yeshua was saying, love your neighbor as yourself is the second command. That's almost equivalent to the first. That's not in the 10 Commandments. So Yeshua was quoting the Torah of Moses when he said the second is the second greatest commandment. Um, the poor and the unfortunate. We know that, remember the rich young ruler when he asked Yeshua, what should he do to enter the kingdom? And Yeshua was rattling off the commandments. And then he said, well, all of those I do. What should I do to be perfect? I want to go above and beyond. And he said, sell all you have and give to the poor and come follow me and you'll have treasures in heaven. And he went away disappointed because he had money and wealth and assets, and that wasn't feasible to him. But remember in Acts chapter 4, all things in common, it's called, when the disciples, Peter and them was, basically selling their assets and sharing it. They were all sharing it. You remember the stories. Ananias and Sapphira held back on a portion of what they were supposed to contribute, and they kind of got heart attacks as a result of being exposed. So also the poor and the unfortunate, that's one of the sects of followers of Yeshua, the Ebionites, which means the poor ones. So they actually were upholding helping the poor as well. By the way, I'm a modern day Ebionite. I align with their teachings, just for a point of reference. But okay, so a lot of commandments pertaining to charity and helping the poor and so forth. Now, treatment of the Gentiles, not to wrong the stranger, to treat them well. So they do give distinctions, I must admit, regarding treating your brother. That's part of the covenant, and treating the Gentiles. You should treat your brother even more so, with consideration. But also there's guidelines or guardrails, not to mistreat Gentiles as well, because God said you were a stranger also at one time, so don't forget to treat the strangers now accordingly. The next category, with categories, Commandment 59 going down, is marriage, divorce, and family. And of course, to honor your father and mother, that's part of the 10 Commandments. Um, I didn't even realize to be fruitful and multiply was a command. I thought it was just, a suggestion, if you will, or recommendation, actually, not suggestion, but recommendation. Because, a lot of people choose not to have children and procreate and so forth. I'm not being judgmental or anything like that. I'm just saying, according to the Torah, the command is to be fruitful and multiply. Maybe we can say in this day and age, because of the population of the earth, 7-8 billion people, it's not as absolute a necessity, as opposed to back in the days when the earth was just growing. So, there's that defense of not being fruitful and multiply. And also the resources of the earth. Do we have enough to be able to accommodate the population growth today? But in any case, that's one of the commands. Um, so uh, this is pertaining to marriage, divorce, and family. To reverently fear your parents, all that is understood, part of honoring your father and mother. Also, if you're divorcing someone, give them a written document of divorce. Don't just kick her out the house, or him, whichever the case. Don't just kick her out the house and say, I'm divorcing you. And she doesn't have a written document, which also is confirmed in Deuteronomy 24, verses 1-5, so that she knows, she can prove that she's free to remarry. But that's, more teachings on the grounds for divorce and remarriage in the New Testament. Matthew chapters 9, I think 5 and 9. I have to double check, but there's a couple teachings in the New Testament regarding grounds for divorce and adultery and so forth. There was a big debate between Shemaiah and Hillel about what were the grounds for divorce. And Shemaiah was very conservative. He was like strict rules, restrictions as to what is grounds. Hillel was more liberal. He was more like anything could be a grounds. As long as you became displeased with her, that's good enough. I think they call it no uncontested divorce nowadays, but as opposed to strict grounds for divorce. Yeshua sided on the side of Shemaiah. He was very strict in his interpretation of what is grounds for divorce. But in any case, this was pertaining to giving her a divorce certificate, as opposed to just letting her go, which is apoluo, the Greek word apoluo, which is translated divorce, but actually means to separate, to let her go without giving her a certificate. And Yeshua said that was wrong. And you cause someone to commit adultery if you apoluo them, put them out, separate without giving them the actual certificate of divorce. So I don't want to spend too much time on that. I was just trying to make a point. Okay. Also, the Levirate marriage, that's also a command that if a brother dies without giving his wife any children, his brother is supposed to take her in and give her children so that the seed can continue through his brother's legacy. So that's one of the commands. I think there was a story in Genesis, I think 49, Onan, he spilt his seed. He didn't want to give, his brother wife any seed because it wouldn't be counted towards him. And he was kind of selfish, and God kind of punished him for that. Okay, forbidden sexual relations, commandments 82 going on down. A lot of it pertains to incest and sodomy. God says not to commit incest at the time of Mount Sinai. Prior to it, I think Abraham married Sarah, who was his half sister. And of course, we all believe that Cain found one of his wives to be his sister. And that's who he married. one of his sisters. Um, but at Mount Sinai, God said, okay, for whatever reason, that's no longer anything that I want you to do. There's medical reasons as a result of it and so forth, but I leave that up to God. So incest, a lot of it has to do with incest. I think one is kind of personal. 101, not to have a intercourse with a woman during her menstrual period. I mean, that should be common sense, but I guess sometimes we need to remind people. Um, I find the commandment 103, not to commit sodomy with a male, I was kind of surprised. I guess it doesn't have to be stated everything, but it never said for the man not to commit quote unquote sodomy with a female. Um, because a lot of people think, a married couple, can commit um, anal, sex. Um, but because the commandment doesn't say a husband can't do that with his wife, it just says the man is not supposed to do it with another man. So they try to find that loophole to justify it. I'm not passing any judgment on it. I'm just simply uh, articulating, what the specific commandment said. Not to castrate any male, 106. um I think Yeshua spoke about, some people were castrated for whatever reasons. I think in the tradition, a lot of kings, when they had a harem of women and they put a man in charge of the women, they usually castrated him because they didn't want him fooling around with the king's harem, and then you would have a Jerry Springer moment where they start getting pregnant. Like how sometimes there's a scandal when you hear a nun gets pregnant. It's like it's for their protection that the man is castrated when he's around women or is in charge of women like that. Um, the next category, times and seasons. Rosh Kadesh, the new moon, not to travel on Shabbat. 109, to sanctify the Shabbat. So the fourth commandment is as part of the 613 as well. Number 110, not to do work on Shabbat. Um, you know, 108 and 110 about traveling and working on the Shabbat. There's a lot of a tremendous amount of volume of material in the oral Torah that the rabbis defined it, interpreted it, they added their opinions to it, and they made it the law, as the oral law, in terms of you can't do this on the Sabbath, you can't do that on the Sabbath, you can't drive a car, you can't answer your cell phone, you can't, do a lot of do's and don'ts, and some people feel it's become legalistic, if you will. But the actual text, when you read them in Exodus, it doesn't really specify all those details. So man has to, the rabbis in particular has to interject their opinion of the details. So, it's questionable because God left it somewhat vague, for lack of a better word, excuse me. But, he said basically sanctify it. So I think he intentionally left it subject to our conscience. That's just my opinion, but that's just my thought. Um, so a lot of the other times and seasons pertaining to the feast days, um, Passover, Sukkot, um, Shavuot, which is Pentecost in Acts chapter 2, Rosh Hashanah, Yom Kippur. So a lot of the, excuse me, Shemini Atzeret, Simchat Torah, a lot of the feast days are discussed in this section. The dietary laws, clean and unclean meat from Genesis chapter 6, when Noah went into the ark and made a distinction. Not eating pork and other, animals that are unclean. Acts chapter 10, there was a discussion about that. And Peter said, there was a vision of unclean meat and the temptation for saying, Peter, eat the unclean meat. And Peter said, nope, nope, I'm not touching unclean meat. And the vision was explained to him as he recounted that it had to do with Gentiles. It wasn't about food per se, but God was using the unclean meat as an example because Peter said he doesn't eat with Gentiles. Also, there's a restriction and not to boil meat with milk and so forth. And, of course, the rabbis interpret that to mean you can't eat a cheeseburger, which is a little bit of a stretch, but, that's how they interpret it. Not to eat anything with blood, because the blood, is the life source. So don't eat anything with blood. Business practices, how you treat people in business, lending to the poor, things like that. A lot of don't be fraudulent in the scales, like don't put, a lot of packaging when you're weighing it in order to weigh down the scale so you can charge more, the price. I think the supermarkets do that too to some extent, when they're weighing something, how much you're going to pay for the fruit, they kind of insert the packaging, the weight of the packaging in order to increase the overall weight. But anyway, I'm not getting into the judging or anything. It's just a thought. But anyway, that's basically that section. It's about, just, being ethical. That's the bottom line, being ethical in your business practices. So it's nothing bad, I mean, the Torah is always seen as like slavery and bondage and nailed to the cross and done away with and and so forth. And this was a schoolmaster, bring us to Christ. Now we don't need the Torah anymore. A lot of words in the New Testament that a certain gentleman used to characterize the Torah. But as we see, the Torah is very, in my opinion, very ethical. And to be honest with you, I think it's very easy also, because a lot of the commandments pertain to the priesthood and sacrifices and, some, that the bottom line, what applies to humanity is not that many, but, it's still, ethical. Psalm 119, David was saying the Torah is beautiful, wonderful, the light unto my path and the lamp unto my feet and all of that and stuff. So Solomon, a lot of them were saying the Torah is wonderful. So, um, that's why I wanted to do the presentation, because some people say that, the Torah is, difficult and bondage. And, there's a analogy about slavery. I think Galatians chapter 4 about Sarah and Haggai. And, basically, I'm not going to get into it, but they're basically saying the Torah is slavery and bondage. A lot of people say that about Sabbath keeping, churches and Sabbath keeping people, that they are, Judaizers. They're, it's keeping the Sabbath is slavery. Um, you know, that's their opinions. So employees, servants, and slaves don't delay payments when they work, things like that. Treat people fair. Again, it's an extension of the commandments pertaining to business practices. Not to wrong a slave. There is one, I think, Exodus 20:21 that I don't necessarily like or agree with. Is that basically the slave master, if he punishes the slave and the slave doesn't die, he should not be punished because the slave is his property. I that's probably one of the few that I have an issue with, but especially knowing on this side of history what happened to, us African Americans during the transatlantic slave trade and how we were abused and so forth. So, that kind of rubs me a little bit the wrong way. But I'm not going to say I'm an expert on interpreting it, but on the surface level, it seemed kind of rough, harsh. All right, so There is also, if a slave ran away and comes to you for refuge, you're supposed to give them refuge. You're not supposed to send them back to the slave master. So that's very humane, right? Um, Vows, oaths, and swearing. Yeshua said, don't vow, let your yes be yes and your no be no. In court, they ask you to swear on the Bible that you'll tell the truth, and you're allowed to say, I affirm, because your religion, the Torah, tells you, or the Bible, if you will, tells you not to swear. Not to swear needlessly. Well, the Torah says not to swear needlessly, but Yeshua says not to swear at all. But if you do make a vow, you should fulfill it. You need to fulfill it. The sabbatical and jubilee years. Let me get into that for a second. Um, I was just looking at something. Yeah, the jubilee years and the jubilee Sabbath is after the 7th year. You're supposed to release people from their servitude, slavery. If you give them a loan after 7 years, you're supposed to release them. If you're plowing the land after 7 years, the 7th year, you're supposed to let the land produce and let poor people come and eat freely from the land on the 7th year. It's kind of difficult for people to do because every year you got bills and so you always want to try to maximize it, but that's what the Torah said you should do. Modern days, credit agency, credit reports, they take stuff off your credit after 7 years, debts and stuff like that. And it came from this principle of the Jubilee year Sabbath. The next is the court and judicial procedures, appointing judges to hear cases. You remember Jethro, Ruel, Moses' father-in-law? He says, you're taking on too much responsibility. You're going to wear yourself out. Appoint judges, and this way you'll be able to decide what needs to be done through the judges. You don't have to take on all the responsibilities. And so this category discusses courts and judicial procedures. So these are pertaining to judges. And, it's basically telling the judges also to be fair, impartial, righteous. Don't put favoritism to a rich person or a famous person, treat everyone equally. Injuries and damages, it actually says if someone is trying to attack someone, you're supposed to defend the victim that's being attacked. You're commanded to defend the victim that's being attacked. Commandment 266, 265, excuse me, and they quote Deuteronomy 25:12 as their source for that. Property and property rights, not to move boundary markers and in your survey and try to be slick and take over people's property. Remember Jezebel, when she wanted to buy a land that wasn't for sale, and she kind of caused the man to be killed so she can steal his land and stuff like that. So the Torah is basically saying respect people's property rights, if you will. Criminal laws, number 278, not to slay an innocent person, like in the 10 Commandments, thou shalt not murder, and of course there's a distinction made between an innocent person as opposed to a person who is capital punished or in circumstances of war and things like that. So there is a distinction. Not to crave something that belongs to another. That's also covered in the section about coveting, don't kidnap, things like that. So punishment and restitution, basically a lot of more judicial laws about being fair, treating people with humanity, even in the punishment. Like you can't lash someone more than 40 times, so keep it reasonable. If you steal, pay back 7 times, when you're caught, and so forth, So when you're able to. The section on prophecy, um, not to prophesy falsely, not to say Jesus is coming in 2026 or whatever, when, that God never revealed that to you, There's a lot of that was going on throughout, in recent years. Idolatry, this is the same as the Ten Commandments, don't commit idolatry, things like that. I don't know about the veneration of the statues that were done in the Catholic Church. I don't know if that could be considered idolatry, or even praying to Mary, as an intercessor. I don't know. I'm not judging. I'm just offering a thought, not an opinion. All right. But also, idolatry again relates to necromancy and those diviners, and like the witch of Endor, that was King Saul went to conjure up Samuel. Don't do those things. It says not to tattoo the body like the idolaters, Commandment 348. So a lot of people have tattoos. That's it's just one of the commandments. I'm not here to judge. Agriculture and animal husbandry. You would think this would be kind of common sense. Excuse me. This would be kind of common sense. Like, don't mate a dog and a cat, or a horse and a donkey, or things like that. I would think this would be common sense, but modern medicine tries to do a lot of stuff. So they try to create new crossbreeds, if you will, the Frankenstein type of science. So the Bible says don't do those type of things. So clothing, man should not wear the clothing of a woman, and vice versa. um I know sometimes men wear those long garments, that we see, that women, can also wear. So there's a lot of unisex clothing, a lot of similarities. I don't know as far as women wearing pants, if that can be considered a woman wearing pertaining to a man. I don't think she's trying to, make believe she's not a uh, like cross dresser, or the trans folks and stuff like that. I don't think that's the intentions. So I'm not sure if this commandment is a restriction on that in particular, but it's just something to discuss. The firstborn, uh, God also wanted you to consecrate your firstborn, especially. But we know he also replaced the firstborn with the Levites, the priesthood. So there's that. Um, but God always wanted you to consecrate. The first of anything should be your blessing. You should want to dedicate it to God, in terms of his service, and in terms of saying thank you to God, your first son, your first daughter, whatever it is, right? So 372. This is what I said about not all commandments apply to everyone. These apply to the Kohanim, which are the priests and the Levites. And there was a lot of restrictions as far as the priests, because they have to be a certain standard, like the priests were only allowed to marry a virgin. They weren't allowed to marry, a divorcee, because they had like a higher standard of consecration, if you will. They couldn't marry a prostitute, like God told what's his name, Hosea, to marry a prostitute, to make a point of how he felt about God was felt abandoned by Israel. They went whoring after other gods, and he wanted to make a point to the children of Israel. So priests had a higher standards. Teruma, tithes and taxes. Teruma is voluntary offerings. Tithes were supposed to be to the Levites, right? The priests, the Kohanim. But in modern day, tithes is to the church, the pastors, whatever. Um, and so I'm not, making a judgment on it. I'm just saying originally it was supposed to be a tithe to the Levites because they weren't given any land, and the priesthoods, and when the lands were divided. Um, I think the first tithe was Abraham to Melchizedek, but he was tithing the war booty that he had just won from the war and all the men in the war and so forth. And Melchizedek said, just give me the men and keep the. No, I'm sorry, that was Chadola Omer. He said, just give me back my men, keep all of the stuff. Um, so, you know. Um, so that's the question mark with tithes. And besides, when you throw out the Torah of Moses, I just wonder how come they don't throw out the tithes too. But anyway, I'm not trying to be a troublemaker. I just thought I'd pose that question. Taxes, we know the taxes, like Yeshua said, who render unto Caesar that which is Caesar's. So, we are told to be responsible citizens that pay the taxes of the land, because there are benefits to taxes, the infrastructure, and so forth and so on. Okay, so the temple, sanctuary, and sacred objects, that's basically the, pertaining to the temple. We don't have a temple now. It's not standing since 70 AD. So a lot of these things, are not, cannot be performed today. However, if you do study prophecy, Ezekiel chapters 40 to 48 does indicate the temple will be rebuilt. So these things will be reinstituted in the future if Ezekiel's prophecies are accurate and will be fulfilled. So, like the next section, sacrifices and offerings. I think the book of Hebrews says, there's no more sacrifice for sins and so forth. And that's very common teaching within the church and Christianity. But like I said, Ezekiel chapters 40 to 48 says the temple will be rebuilt and also sacrifices. The next section is, so we can skip by sacrifices, there's no temple. But by the way, sacrifices were still performed after Yeshua's death in 33 AD up until 70 AD. Even in Acts 21, it mentions the gentleman who was making sacrifices when they accused him of apostasy. I won't say his name, but anyway, it's not important. When they accused the gentleman of apostasy, he went into the temple to try to make sacrifices to show that he still upheld the Torah and so forth. But he paid for the vows of 4 men who they believe were under a Nazirite vow. And at the end of the Nazirite vow, they're supposed to cut their hair. And so he was paying for the haircuts, and he made a sacrifice in the temple. So sacrifices were made for people who have that doctrine, even after Yeshua died, up until 70 AD. Excuse me. Ritual purity and impurity. There's not that much leprosy that is existing today. But, basically, like the priests and, if they came in contact with a dead body and things like that, they were supposed to take the bath, I think the mikvah bath. And many say that's where the concept of immersion or baptism comes from, the mikvah bath that were performed for ritual impurity. So, the seed of copulation defiles, certain discharges defiled, and you were supposed to take a ceremonial bath. As a matter of fact, the same gentleman in Acts 21, he was taking a ceremonial bath in the temple when the Jews from Asia came up and said Trophimus the Ephesian was actually an uncircumcised Gentile in the temple, and he wasn't supposed to be because he was uncircumcised. And the gentleman was saying, I'm taking a ritual bath. I have nothing to do with that. So that's where they believe baptism came from, the ritual baths. Again, lepers and leprosy, you don't see too much of that today, but there are certain laws. The king, laws pertaining to the king. I think this one is pretty interesting. Um, the king, number 584 commandment. The king shall not acquire an excessive number, or excuse me, 585. 584 is horses. 585 is the king shall not acquire excessive number of wives. Deuteronomy 17:17. I think what's his name? King Solomon kind of violated that one, 700 wives, 300 concubines, even though it wasn't all for lustful purposes, it was more so for trade and business and trade and so forth. Making deals like, okay, I'll take your daughter to show that I'm going to be faithful to you. I'm not going to turn her back because I'm your son-in-law now, So, but he did kind of have 1,000 wives and concubines is a bit excessive, I would think, 365 days and you have 1,000. Even if you're with a woman every day, you won't see her again until 4 years because you have to go through 3 years in order to cycle through the 1,000. Anyway, I'm just being trivial, not trivial, but just trivia. That's what I meant. Okay, so Nazarites. Commands about not cutting his hair, not drinking wine, things like that. The last category is about wars, things that you should do and not do when you're committing when you're in an act of war, defending your country, your land, and so forth. In terms of, I found one thing that's interesting. Commandment 604 and 605 is that in Deuteronomy 20 and 21, it tells you that if you're taking prisoners of war, like you have to take prisoners of war. And if you see a beautiful woman who's a prisoner, you're allowed to keep her and marry her and treat her good. So I guess, if you're a prisoner of war, it pays to be a beautiful woman. And that's Deuteronomy 21, verse 14, as well. Commandments 604, 605, 606. So the very last commandment, 613, pertains to the Amalekites who had mistreated the children of Israel during when they were coming into the land. So that's basically it. So that's basically the 613 commands. To me, they pretty much seem very easy. I think in Acts 15, Peter said, why are you putting a burden on us to keep the commands when we know our fathers were able to keep it? And Deuteronomy 28, verses 15 to 68, blessings and curses, for being obedient to the command. So I think it's, I kind of disagree with Peter. I don't think it's that hard to keep the commands. Out of the 613, a lot of them were not even applicable to the everyday person. So the ones that were didn't seem unreasonable. It seemed like God is trying to institute holiness. Of course, we can disagree with certain aspects, certain commands. We can debate this one or that one, but overall, God was trying to establish holiness. So I see it as a good thing. So that's it. Please like and subscribe. Don't forget, and also comment, your opinions on the Torah of Moses, anything that was discussed, and I'll put the link in the description so that you can look at the list too and see if there's anything that you take umbrage, with. All right. So thanks again for now. Thanks for taking your time to listen. Hopefully, I try to go through it as quickly as possible. All right. Take care and God bless.